Alright, this is me doing a voiceover of this project because it looks like it didn't take the first time. So I'm setting up the pieces for the track now. The intent is to be a relatively easy circuit made up of mostly half pipes. I'm putting a start line on this generic flat platform and then making sure the car spawns there. Okay, so we're good. What I'm doing now is adding a spline connector to either side of this platform so the track spline will actually attach to the right bits. I initially wanted to make this a circuit. It didn't end up being one, but I just spent a long time here making sure that the spline connectors are actually centered and pointing at the right spot to the track. So I'm creating a new spline right now, making sure it's aligned right to the start of the track right there, and then I'll add a spline object to it, and then it gets moved. It's no big deal, just making sure the spline bits are properly aligned to each other. Changing the snap setting so it actually does get aligned, and then snapping it to the spline connector. It's rotated wrong, had to re-rotate it. There we go. So I'm back to actually making the track spline now. First I extend it flat, and I'm going to make a container for the platforms. I think I just have a couple sticking out, and then I clone them. There we go. And then I add the half pipe mesh to the side because the car is intended to drive sideways on the half pipe after a little while. Just making sure it's aligned. And then I do the same container-based cloning solution for the main half pipe. Then I start adding curves. The half pipe looks sharp, so I smooth the curves a little bit. Right now my main aim is to have a interesting elevation change, but also a curve not of decreasing radius, because curves like that feel bad to drive. So for this I'm bringing the track down a little bit. My aim now is to have the player transfer onto the wall on the other side of the track. And in order to do that, I'm going to need to add another half pipe. So I cloned it, made a right half pipe container, deleted all the clones, and now I'm aligning the right half pipe before I clone it. So I want it to start there, and then I'm just going to clone it. There we go. Alright, so I'm currently messing with the turn. I think I realized that turn is going to be a little bit too sharp right now. Or actually, no. Okay, I'm just putting it straight through. I'm going to add a little wall section where the player is going to transfer up horizontally onto the sign on the wall, drive sideways, and then go back down the other side. The issue is that this sign is not subdivided, so I'm increasing the automatic resolution generation on the sign via the spline tools, and I'm changing its decal mesh to a left turn. I briefly toyed with the idea of putting the animated banner right there, but I think I ended up scrapping that idea. Here's a test drive. Pretty good. I realize it sends you extremely far from this angle, so I'm actually changing it to be a loop corkscrew that goes above and around the bridge. I also notice how the bridge cables intersect there. I eventually moved the bridge forward, so that doesn't happen, but that is not in this video. So here's what I'm doing now, which is making an overhead loop with the cloned spline container strategy that the player is going to use their centrifugal force momentum to transfer around. I also realized I should add a tilt and have the other half of the spline, or have the other half of the half pipes appear early so the player knows what's coming. Then I'm just messing with the rotation issues, and then putting the spline, putting the other overhead half pipe there, and now it's back to the half pipe on the left side at ground level. It's having some issues cloning it here, so I had to eventually just delete it, reclone it, and then that worked just then. Alright, so now I'm making sure the stripes are aligned with everything else. Looks good. Then I'm just extending the spline in a straight line here. Moving the arrow walls over that way. I need a new sign material for them. It took me a second, but I think I just went with the caution sign. Yeah, there we go. So I added a couple more to give the player some breathing room as they're coming down off that loop. And now I'm extending the spline and trying to figure out what to do with it. So now I add a pretty gradual sweeping curve along the right side, and I'm trying to figure out how that feels to drive. Feels good, doesn't seem terrible, but I realized that there's some issues with that S-bend right before the ceiling overhead half pipe. It's kind of an awkward approach. Generally the players needs to be shooting straight through and then be able to go up over the ceiling with minimal input. So that's feeling a little bit better, and it's back to messing with the track some more. I didn't like the initial elevation change where you have to drive uphill, so I am lowering the start line of the spline back into the ground and disabling the platforms. That way you just kind of start on the ground and then drive uphill. The tangents on that made that curve look weird, so I'm messing with them to be able to figure out how to make it look as smooth as possible. Alright, then it is back to the other end. So I'm trying to bring the half pipe around in a big curve and pull it underneath the overhead loop to the right of the bridge. So I'm adding another half pipe on the other side right now, and then bringing it through like that. I'm still not sure what to do with it at this point, so I just kind of pan around and like try to think about different ideas. So I think at this point I had an idea to end it with a loop or something. In order to do that, I needed the end of the spline to be completely straight and axis aligned. At this point I was just panning back, looking around. I also was thinking about adding another overhead banked area here, because maybe that would catch the player. So now I'm adding the run up to the loop with some more generic platforms. I'm extending the left hand half pipe out, not using the automatic cloning tool, just manually doing it, and doing another test drive of the track to see how that feels. Okay, so there's basically enough space, but I elected to take out that overhead ceiling because it might trick the player into thinking there's going to be another overhead transfer coming up, which is not the case. It's just a normal banked turn. And now there is enough time to transfer out onto the loop, so I'm going to make a self-overlapping loop out of these half pipe messers. In order to do that, I need to, I'm not putting them in the spline right now because they're axis aligned, which actually turned out to be a mistake as I edited the spline later and it got out of sync with the loop, but this version of me in this video right here did not know that. So the intent is for the player to go up, jump through the air, go through an overhead loop, and then loop back on themselves. Right now I'm just making sure that all the loop pieces are aligned. So I've got that one, I'm cloning it and making sure I have enough space. There we go. And then there's going to be one more that will toss them out that way. So the car hit something. There's an issue with how Unity treats fast-moving physics rigid bodies. Right there where my mouse was jittering, there is a collision box for the top edge of the half pipe. Even though the car can never physically connect with that top edge of the half pipe because it's driving on a continuous surface, Unity will treat the car as able to clip through. So I'm going into Blender, making a new half pipe collision mesh, and taking out the top edge and the side edges. That's what I'm doing here. Have a new mesh, selecting everything that's coplanar there, moving it back. So I take those so that the mesh has an override for the collision. I take it out of the spline, and I'm met with this, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on there. That's because the shape I was carving it out of is completely flush with the edges of the cylinder, or the cylinder half pipe. Spline Architect is also throwing some issues, so I ended up taking the spline object out of it. So if you look at the half pipe collision mesh here, you can see that it is kind of bugged like that. So I'm trying to figure out why that's the case. I end up eventually, hopefully, looking at the boolean that I used to carve out of it. Yeah, right there. Notice how it's flush with the edge, and so I just extrude those edges so they actually cut off the half pipe corner correctly. Okay, there I verified that it works, and I'm updating the half pipe no edge collision. The mesh collider isn't rendering for some reason, I think. So it's rendering there, but it's not working for these. So I just took out the mesh collider component and added it again. Okay, so I put it back that way. It seems to be working. And I do a test drive, not knowing I'm going to fling myself into the wall because I aligned the loops incorrectly. There we go, hit the wall, but I was able to take the loops. Okay, so that's progress. I actually move them up to realign them. I decide not to play it. Give myself more of a run-up to transfer onto the flat platforms before the loop, and then do another test drive here. Alright, that was good. Accidentally opened Cortana. What else? Alright, now I think I'm trying to... Oh yeah. So I think now is when I realized I'm just doing a route, not a continuous hot lap style track. So I'm going back here. Adding some collisions to the water so the car can hydroplane on it for later levels if necessary. Checking this again. That initial S-turn before the overhead transfer is a little bit awkward. I spend a little while playing around with it, but don't care about it for now. So right now what I'm doing is I'm moving the start line to a different spot. When you start off previously, you're facing away from all the interesting stuff in the track, and you have to drive uphill. I'm remedying both of those by making it so that the player starts off facing the interesting bits of the track and gets to drive downhill and pick up speed. So there's a little bit of spline stuff that I have to change here. So by doing that, I misaligned all the other bits of the spline. So I'm just moving everything else basically so it aligns with the bridge, which is a pretty nice reference point. Okay, so I've got that. I'm messing with the camber and elevation changes. And making new platforms to clone along the spline. I noticed that right there, the spline connector is not deforming the initial ramps correctly. So I have to change its blend width right there like that. You have to make it clip slightly into the rest of the track, but that's okay. And now I'm just changing the start and end bits. Okay, so the player should probably transfer onto the half pipe by then. I'm also just changing the start line. Realized I left another piece there. Trying to make it level, but I think I end up later on making it move just completely up. Making sure the loop end is aligned and doing another test drive. So that was an awkward turn right there. Also awkward turn. I can't tell if it's because I'm driving bad or the track itself is actually bad. So I mess with the curve a little bit, try again. Slightly better, still kind of hard to tell though. There's some physics issue, bounce off the ramp, and then I realized, oh yes, those signs are actually having the same issue that the half pipes are. I get distracted and go back and do that. I think I was just trying to mess with the chicane again before I open Blender and start working on the signs. Yeah. So the mesh collider wasn't working there for some reason. Oh yeah, I tried disabling the mesh collider, that's what it was. So disabling the mesh collider didn't work because the car didn't have enough to push off of and didn't align itself perfectly with the vertical loop. That turn was too sharp. Moving these, making sure they're aligned. They are not quite aligned for some reason. Something with Unity's snapping settings. So I put them back in the spline. Two pieces get put at the start of the spline for some reason, and I have to manually fix that. I was just dragging them in the inspector. Alright, so now these two, their collision boxes are still fucked up, so I go back to the half pipe and delete everything on the edges, realized I needed to make a copy, delete the edges. Realized I duplicated the edges inside the original one, they weren't linked to anything. Delete them, and wait, I think I delete them there. And now we're good. So re-import, pull them out of the spline, put the new weird collision meshes with no edges in there, and then put them back in the spline, and then try test driving it again. Oh yeah, spline was misaligned there. Misaligned on one axis, making sure all that stuff worked. Trying again. After this video, I ended up signposting the starting curve area a little bit more. That way the player knows that they're going to have to turn right there. So the car actually can't make it through that gap. I'm adding a little piece of ground there. Having some issues with the rotation, but finally figured it out. It would be nice to be able to use the actual rotation gizmos. The snapping settings are messed up, so I cannot snap it directly to the road level. I try to mess with those for a second, and then still end up just changing the spline, the position manually in the position field, and give it one last try. Alright, there we go. That basically looks good. I give a few more little bits of run-up checkpoints there. Change the camber there, just to make the first turn more interesting. This is basically at the fine-tuning step right now. And I try this and see how it works. Okay, so now you start with the tilt. The car bounced off something, but it might have been my own bad driving. I was trying to figure out what it was. So I tried again, and I think it just works this time. Yeah. Okay, so that works just fine. And now it's time to add finish lines and checkpoints. So I'm adding a finish line right there. So you'll drive through the loop, go through the finish, and then also move it backwards a little bit so you get a little bit more airtime. And then it's time to add checkpoints. So I have to add a spline object to them at the start before I put them inside the spline. Otherwise, the trigger hitboxes of the checkpoints get weirdly deformed. So I have to make sure they're followers and not deformations of the spline. So just trying to put them around places in the track where you can't cut it and they don't clip through the track. And that looks pretty much good. I lowered that checkpoint so you could see the upcoming loop better. And I think this is me trying to set a author metal time. Yep, oh. What did I do there? Oh yeah, I forgot to set it to a route race instead of a hot lap, so now there's an actual countdown. Okay, second nitro, and then I do a third one. And that is the author time. So now I try to figure out a good gold override threshold. I kind of drive a little bit lazily, only nitro once or twice. Figure out, okay, go to the track registry, say, let's call it 25 seconds even. So now set the gold override to 25 seconds and go back. It's time to get a thumbnail image for the track. So I just started it and went into photo mode. This seems to encapsulate a good part of the track. So go to trustworthy Photopia, cropped it pretty much to a square almost immediately. I save all the track thumbnails as 500 by 500, put them in the thumbnail folder, go back, change the import settings to Sprite, 2D, and UI. Okay, apply it in the track registry, and now if we go back to the main menu and load it, we're met with this. A bunch of spline architect errors, meshes and the vertices are not happening correctly. They're not named, but they just have the mesh coordinates. I mess with a few of them. Okay, and it rebuilds, recompiles, and I just try running it again, exiting to the menu, and there we go. It works this time. Okay, did all the way through, and that is it.